Previously on the Abraham Accords.
Middle East peace, people refer to it as the example of impossible things.
This problem is like a big concrete wall. And the president basically has told us he wants us to try to break through the wall.
People told us to tell the Palestinians release their veto on the peace process. You can't get any of this done.
The president will recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
There has been condemnation across the globe. Mahmoud Abbas said the announcement could lead to wars that never end.
What has happened is a change in the Arab world and a strategic understanding that it is in their national interest to move into a relationship with Israel.
Believing that there's a reason that you're doing what you're doing could be the difference maker when things can go.
In the ancient history of the Middle East, a man named Abraham received a promise from God that he would become the father of many nations. The Bnei Yisrael are the Jewish descendants of Abraham's son Isaac from his wife Sarah. The Bnei Yishmael are the Arabic descendants of Abraham's son Ishmael from his wife's handmaiden Hagar. From the house of Israel, the Jewish prophet Moses would be born, and the Torah would be written. Centuries later, from the house of Israel, Jesus, the Messiah of the Christian faith, would be born, and the New Testament would be written. From the house of Ishmael, the Islamic prophet Muhammad would be born, and the Quran would be written. Through the centuries, the three religions of the Abrahamic faith have collided. In no place more so than Jerusalem. With the fall of the Ottoman Empire after World War I, ancient nations were restored in the Middle East, including the State of Israel, fulfilling Old Testament prophecies. And every U.S. president since has tried, with greater or lesser success, to build the alliances needed for a lasting peace. Recently, at an unlikely time, with an unlikely group, led by an unlikely president, nations of the divided faiths of Abraham came together against all odds and laid a foundation for peace that bears the name of their common father, the Abraham Accords. When working on a plan for peace, the obvious enemy is war. Our administration continuously checked all the signals, both public and private, to ensure that our diplomatic efforts were on a path to peace, not war.
We must be united in pursuing the one goal that transcends every other consideration. That goal is to meet history's great test, to conquer extremism.
On our way to what would become the Abraham Accords, our administration's hope was to strengthen a group of trusted allies who would stand not only with the United States, but also with Israel when it came to resisting terrorism and enhancing regional stability. We wanted to unblock communication and relationships and to honor goals that different countries already had in common. Among the things the United States could do towards this hope and against the threat of war was to help contain the threat of a nuclear-armed Iran.
Came in as the Iran director and then expanded to, encompass a number of countries, ultimately the Middle East and North Africa. The general idea behind our foreign policy approach in the Middle East, there was an aggressive part of it where we had to defeat the remaining remnants of ISIS and also confront Iran and constrain it.
For decades, Iran has fueled the fires of sectarian conflict and terror. It is a government that speaks openly of mass murder, vowing the destruction of Israel, death to America, and ruin for many leaders and nations in this very room.
I've spent most of my career, most of my adult life in this region engaged in conflict, fighting terrorism and combating threats to the United States and our partners and our allies. I know the cost associated with it. My daughter's earliest memory, in fact, her first words were Taliban boom. I was gone, I think, when she was less than a year old to Afghanistan in October of 2001. I've missed half my daughter's life. She's now 20. And so the sacrifices that our service members undergo is not lost on me. And I've been, unfortunately, to the funeral for far too many people I know. For most Americans, and I don't exclude myself in this, most are trying to understand exactly why it's necessary for the United States to project and sustain force and expend enormous capital overseas in the Middle East for decade after decade. I think my experience on the ground in the region led me to a different conclusion, I think, than you'd arrive at through normal circumstances. As a soldier, by the nature of our profession and the time we spend in the region, relationships are critical to us. The positive or constructive approach that we were taking was two parts. First is expanding the normalization among nations and Israel's neighbors, improving their relations, building a foundation around Israel to improve its security and the United States' security. And the other part of it was to contribute to a broader regional enduring security architecture.
Our goal is a coalition of nations who share the aim of stamping out extremism.
We haven't had an effective team on the field of partners and allies. We've occasionally built alliances and coalitions to confront the threat in Afghanistan, in Iraq, to defeat ISIS. But what we've never really done, beyond the investment on Israel, is to build a team in the region so that our presence is not always required to face a threat. An effective alliance in the region that stands together against these threats with the United States when the time comes.
You know, President Trump came into office saying the Iranian nuclear deal was the worst deal in the history of the world, and he was going to end it. And that sent a message to the region that the United States was standing up to their biggest enemy. The biggest enemy of the Emirates, the biggest enemy of the Saudis, the biggest enemy of Bahrain is Iran.
You know, you had the whole Iran deal. President Obama was never able to get it through Congress, and so he signed it through an executive order. And because of that, Congress wanted to make sure that every president would have a stopgap. So every 90 days or so, if you thought Iran was a national security threat, the president got to certify or not certify. That first National Security Council meeting, the president talks about decertifying. Everybody says, don't do it, the sky is falling. Go to the second one. Don't do it, don't do it. And I remember—
I didn't say don't do it.
No, you didn't say. There were only three of us, three or four of us that said, you should do this.
Yeah.
I saw the frustration he had, and so I went and spoke to him afterwards, and I said, let me go to Vienna. Let me go to the IAEA that oversaw the Iran deal, and let me bring back proof of why you could do it. You make whatever decision you're going to make, but let me make the case for you so that should you decide to get out, we can. I went to Vienna, and the first thing I asked that board was I said, we know nuclear production's happening in the research universities, and we know they're happening in the military installations. When's the last time you did an inspection? They said, we can't inspect those. Iran doesn't allow us to inspect either one.
Under the Iran nuclear deal, Iran agreed to shut down its production of weapons-grade uranium, and it allowed regular inspections by the International Atomic Energy Agency, which says Iran has stuck by its side of the deal.
So then I said, okay, where you do suspect nuclear production, when was the last time you went? Where do you go? And they said, well, first, we notify Iran that we want to inspect. Then we give 45 days notice. I said, so you mean to tell me that if you think there's production, you tell them 45 days in advance when they could go take it all out? And they said, well, they could, and sometimes they ask for an extension from the 45 days. So I came back, said a speech saying, I don't know what the president's going to do, but these are the reasons he would be justified. And oh, by the way, they're violating multiple UN resolutions by selling weapons to the Houthis in Yemen, by testing ballistic missiles, by supporting terrorism. And so we made the case.
President Trump's major announcement today being watched all over the world, pulling the U.S. out of the Iran nuclear deal and imposing tough new sanctions on Iran instead.
The deal allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium and, over time, reach the brink of a nuclear breakout. The deal lifted crippling economic sanctions on Iran in exchange for very weak limits on the regime's nuclear activity and no limits at all on its other malign behavior. In fact, the deal allowed Iran to continue enriching uranium. Last week, Israel published intelligence documents, long concealed by Iran, conclusively showing the Iranian regime and its history of pursuing nuclear weapons. The United States will withdraw from the Iran nuclear deal.
Anguished by today's decision, former President Obama, he warns the United States could eventually be left with a losing choice between a nuclear-armed Iran or another war in the Middle East.
Hassan Rouhani announcing he has ordered Iran's scientists to prepare to start enriching uranium again if necessary.
America will not be held hostage to nuclear blackmail. I will sign a presidential memorandum to begin reinstating U.S. nuclear sanctions on the Iranian regime.
We isolated Iran as she'd never been isolated before. We brought great pressure to bear on her malign activities across the region. In that sense, I think we also earned respect and friendship from other countries that were just as concerned about Iranian aggression.
That was the first step to the world that the United States means business. It was the first step, I think, that the Palestinians and the Arab countries realized you couldn't push over the United States. And it was the start to solidifying what was getting ready to happen with Israel.
In withdrawing from the Iran deal, President Trump had fulfilled a campaign promise. In not just recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital, but actually moving the U.S. embassy there, President Trump would fulfill another. You and I were in the room together on many occasions when the president discussed our diplomatic advancements on Israel. Most people say you have to weaken Israel to make peace with the Arab nations. Here, we did just the opposite, and we got results that nobody anticipated. What's your take on that?
Well, let's start with the embassy move. As you recall, there were people who were highlighting the risks, and the president had a lot of conviction. And I think one of the things most people don't appreciate is Congress passed a law years and years ago calling for the embassy to be moved. And it was every single other president that signed a national security waiver that prevented it.
That law, which was reaffirmed just last year by a vote of 90-0 in the Senate, declared Jerusalem to be the capital of Israel and mandated the move of the embassy.
I remember the whole world literally went against us. And sitting in that Security Council meeting with the entire world condemning us.
The state of Israel, as the nation state of the Jewish people, has a place among the nations. It cannot be the Jew among the nations that is singled out in the double standards applied to it as compared with any other country. The moment, and any lawyer knows this, but also just common sense, the moment that you enable a double standard, a singling out of one person in the application of law, a moral ambiguity that applies the law or implements the law to one person and not to the other, to one country and not to the other, to one group and not to the other, you've actually undermined the entire system.
Jerusalem is the home of Israel's parliament, president, prime minister, Supreme Court, and many of its ministries. It is simple common sense that foreign embassies be located there. In virtually every country in the world, U.S. embassies are located in the host country's capital city. Israel should be no different. I was so mad, but so determined that the U.S. puts its embassy in every capital in the world.
Will those in favor of the draft resolution please raise their hand? Thank you. Those against? Thank you. 14 votes in favor, 1 vote against.
The Security Council condemned us. That was my first U.S. veto and the first we had had in years.
After the council voted, that look with your hand up, it was very iconic, I think, that look of determination on your face.
Yeah, ask my husband, you don't want that look.
You don't want that look, yeah.
The draft resolution has not been adopted owing to the negative vote of a permanent member of the Council.
Then it goes to the entire UN General Assembly. They bring it up there, 193 countries. But what was amazing was you started to see a shift, which was normally we would have lost that vote miserably.
Right.
70 countries didn't condemn the U.S. They either voted with us or they abstained. 70. That was something we had never seen before.
Yeah.
And moving that embassy truly was not only a courageous moment, but it turned that page. It turned the page in the book for U.S.-Israel relations in a way like nothing before. And you were going at speed, fast speed, to get it done before anybody changed their mind.
Yeah, we weren't going to let the grass grow under our feet on that.
When I decided I was going to do it, which was really before I got elected, to be honest, one of the things I wanted to do is actually get it built. And we had that done within 4 months after we conceived of it.
one of the great moments of the last 4 years was being here with you, representing the president at the delegation, and being here for the embassy.
So the iconic, 5-second clip is you pulling the ropes that brought down the curtain that exposed the embassy flag. When we did it in rehearsal, so I pulled it, and it didn't pull. I pulled it and I tugged and it didn't open. I said to my staff, we've got 100 million people watching us. I am not putting the Secretary of the Treasury in front of a curtain. That's not going to work. You didn't see that we had 2 guys on top. Like when you pulled, if it didn't work, they had a release that they were going to make it work. So,
well, I'm glad you were well prepared for me.
I did not want to have that conversation with you if it didn't open up.
We welcome you officially and for the first time to the Embassy of the United States here in Jerusalem, the capital of Israel.
But when all those conversations were happening, I remember more often than not the president would stop and say, but I told people that I would do it.
And that just reverberated, I think, throughout the world and throughout the foreign policy establishment.
If you want to do a deal, the first thing you do is you take off the table what's not negotiable. And I think the president had the sense that by moving the embassy to Jerusalem, we would make peace more possible, not less possible.
I believe peace is within reach if we dare to believe that the future can be different from the past, that we are not condemned to relive history, and that the way things were is not how they must forever be.
Following the initial 1948 conflict between Israel and Arab nations, the United Nations General Assembly established the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine refugees in the Near East. It is abbreviated as UNRWA and referred to as UNRWA. Its purpose was to carry out direct relief and works programs for displaced Palestinians. UNRWA is the only UN agency dedicated to helping refugees from a specific region or conflict. It has grown to be the largest agency in the United Nations. Jewish refugees from Arab lands who were evicted after the 1948 war are about equal in number to the displaced Palestinians. The UN did not create an agency to help them. The UN handles all other refugee aid worldwide through UNHCR, the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. The High Commission is mandated to settle refugees rapidly and to help them get on with their lives as quickly as possible, most frequently in countries other than those they fled. UNRWA policy is different and states that Palestinian Arabs who fled Israel in the course of the 1948 war, as well as all of their descendants, are to be considered refugees until political actors find a just and durable solution to the conflict. When UNRWA began in 1950, it was responding to the needs of about 700,000 Palestinian refugees. By 2019, because of the expansive UNRWA definition, some 5.6 million people were registered as eligible for UNRWA services, even though many already had resettled. Among its many controversies is the argument that UNRWA creates dependency without a mandate to relieve refugee status. You led the fight against UNRWA. They've been found to be corrupt. You're out there for your time as ambassador to the UN.
I went to the UNRWA schools. I went into all of that Palestinian area, looked at it because I wanted to be able to speak knowledgeably when I was at the Security Council, and I wanted to come in with open eyes, open mind, and see for myself. And I questioned the UNRWA programmers at the time and said, why are you continuing to show hate in the textbooks? You know, why do you have to say if you have 5 Israeli soldiers and we kill 4, you know, how many are left? Why is it that you're teaching children at such a young age? They said, oh, we've tried to work that out. We've tried to see that. And I said, well, prove it to me. They never could prove it. The second thing was I noticed that they would always have this effort where they'd say, schools aren't going to open. We have to have money or schools aren't going to open. And they'd always come to the U.S. with their hand out. And I kept thinking, okay, well, you make the reforms and then we'll look at the funding. They never showed any interest in reforming that organization. So when I went to the president, I said, you know, we're getting ready to give $120 million to UNRWA, just in our first payment. You know, we've given $6 billion to the Palestinians over the years. But my concern is every year they're saying the schools aren't going to open, the kids are going to get involved in more, riots are going to break out. I said, but number one, why aren't the Arab countries paying for it? Why is it the U.S. that's paying for it? And two, to no matter what we do, they still protest America and Israel in the streets. I was trying for them not to give any. Even after they gave the $60 million, they protested us in the street because we only gave $60 million. So I went into the Security Council and I said, all of the Arab countries combined don't even give a percentage of what the U.S. is giving. So from now on, you pay for it. If you believe in this Palestinian organization, you pay for it. Don't tell us to pay for it.
They were dealing with the Palestinians, and so was I initially. And they came in and they talked well, and then they say death to Israel, death to America. I said, are we actually giving them money? And they said, yes, sir, we're paying about $700 million a year. I said, you mean it's $700 million and it's death to all of us? I don't think so. And I ended that.
After freezing all funding to the United Nations Palestinian Refugee Agency, the Trump administration has just announced another bombshell change in its Middle East policy. The White House has officially closed the PLO's offices in Washington, D.C., accusing the Palestinians of ceasing to pursue a meaningful peace with Israel.
This decision also comes just a few days after the Trump administration cut some $25 million in aid monies that was being used to fund Palestinian hospitals in East Jerusalem.
For Palestinian leaders, the writing is on the wall. Most have unanimously declared the United States an enemy of the Palestinian people, a war chant that first started last year with Trump's recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital.
President Trump announcing a significant move involving Israel. He tweeted just moments ago, quote, after 52 years, it is time for the United States to fully recognize Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights.
Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights is so important to Israel in defending itself against Syria.
But at that time, it was 52 years, and they've been negotiating on the Golan Heights. Nothing would ever happen. And I said, David, give me a quick lesson on the Golan Heights. And you talked to me about security in terms of being able to see, having vision,
right.
A little thing called having vision, and immensely important. And I made a very quick but correct decision. Israel got sovereignty over the Golan Heights.
People we called at State, NSC, and other agencies seem to be taken a bit by surprise on the timing, if not the policy itself, because we're assuming a presidential tweet equates to policy, although we're not exactly sure.
He's tweeting out another policy that obviously has not been worked out with our international partners, and frankly gives up one of the chips that everyone thought would be part of a Middle East peace agreement. It's going to create real problems with our Arab partners in that part of the world.
Remember, for 19 years between the establishment of Israel in 1948 and 1967, the Arabs openly said, we're going to destroy you. We're just going to wipe you off the map. After our great victory in 1967 in the Six-Day War, we pushed Israel's borders from the outskirts of Tel Aviv across a big mountain, the mountains of Judea and Samaria, to the banks of the Jordan. Now, you couldn't just conquer us. It was impossible. So the Arab propaganda in those years devised a new theory. It said, first you have to get Israel to withdraw to indefensible lines, and once it couldn't protect itself, then we'll make peace with you. And they called it territory for peace. We would be completely helpless. Arab countries, and the Palestinians especially, unreconciled to Israel's existence, would pocket the territories and then destroy us from indefensible lines.
Supporting Israel's right to defend itself is central to our conception of nations and their duty to their own people.
Mike Pompeo has become the first U.S. Secretary of State to visit an Israel West Bank settlement and the Golan Heights.
And you spoke about the battle of the Valley of Tears.
The story of the Valley of Tears is a remarkable one. It's Israeli forces who are trapped. It looks like it may be the end, and frankly, in that sense, the risk to Israel was enormous if they didn't hold this particular set of battle positions, but those men fought, and they fought with great power, and the United States came to their aid and their assistance. It may have been late, but it was timely, and that history is so important.
There are other reasons to support Israel. If you're not a believer, if you have no particular allegiance or alliance or historical perspective on Israel, if you just want to keep America safe, it still makes a lot of sense to support Israel and to provide the funding that we provide their military at that.
No, David, you and I used to talk about this. Look, it's a special place for you and I because of our beliefs. But if you're just a real politic, no BS guy that wants to make sure that Americans are safe, the relationship with Israel is absolutely central. I knew in my role as Secretary of State, this was a central element of America's national security to have this deep partnership with the Israelis, both diplomatic and military. If we got that right, I knew that the risk of our young men and women having to go fight was decreased. They have an intelligence capability that is unequaled. They're prepared to share and help the United States not only in the challenge against the Islamic Republic of Iran, but help us wherever else we need space and assistance.
In a moment, I will sign a presidential proclamation recognizing Israel's sovereign right over the Golan Heights.
Syria obviously is not pleased. Russia said it violates the UN Security Council resolutions.
So this was a long time in the making. Should have taken place many decades ago.
Recognition of sovereignty over the Golan Heights, or the decision to end the Iran deal, to place maximum pressure on Iran. All these things, each one standing by itself and collectively, was predicted to begin a wave of violence. And yet, at the end of the day, what did it accomplish? It accomplished a wave of peace. Why do you suppose that happened?
Well, I've given a great deal of thought to it. One of the historic errors that the United States made over the years, going all the way back to the Carter administration, was the fiction of being an honest broker. The idea that America somehow was sitting at the middle of the table trying to negotiate a peace agreement, particularly between the Israelis and the Palestinians, leave aside other Arab nations. And I think what President Trump understood and our administration understood was, if the world knows nothing else, the world needs to know this: that America stands with Israel, that we were on the side of the table with Israel, first negotiating on behalf of her security, on behalf of her prosperity, but at the same time being willing to engage in good faith with those who would be willing to pursue peace.
In international political life, they look at how you treat your allies. If you treat them with respect, if you treat them not merely with cordiality, but you actually look after their interests, then you'd look after these countries' interests if they became strong allies of the United States. And I think there's a lot of credit to the change in American policy towards Israel that produced this change in Arab countries' policies towards Israel too.
In 2019, our government was looking to conduct a conference here in the Middle East. We called it the Peace to Prosperity Conference. It wasn't so easy to find a sponsor within this region. Your government stepped up, the king stepped up. We had this beautiful conference. It was the first step along the way, I believe at least, to get to the Abraham Accords.
You know, you really have to look at the context then to realize how important the decision was and how bold the decision was and how much risk that was taken at that time.
Sure.
Countries in the region were facing troubles, some, and some are in chaos, civil wars. The youth, the young, have been deprived of their education, no shelter, no clean water.
America is prepared to stand with you in pursuit of shared interests and common security. But the nations of the Middle East cannot wait for American power to crush this enemy for them. The nations of the Middle East will have to decide what kind of future they want for themselves, for their country, and frankly, for their families and for their children. Terrorism has spread all across the world, but the path to peace begins right here on this ancient soil in this sacred land.
The people of the Middle East, many of them needed hope. And the decision of His Majesty at that time was to light a candle at the end of the tunnel.
The administration's peace plan had two parts, one economic, the other political. The revelation of the economic side of the plan came first.
A lot of the leading Palestinian business people who we speak to wanted to be here tonight. They were told by the authority not to come, and because they rely on them for their livelihood, it's not a free market where they can make those distinctions.
The whole notion in that conference was you had investors from all over the world and CEOs come and assemble and said, we want to help the Palestinians. We had Steve Schwartzman, one of the greatest investors in the world, come and say, this actually isn't even that much money. We could do this. Like, this is very doable, and this is a very manageable plan.
These were the scenes across Gaza and the West Bank as the Bahrain Conference got underway. Thousands of Palestinians against a plan they say attempts to buy them off.
The best thing you can do, because we all want to see the Palestinians lifted up, the best thing you can do is get them to a negotiating table. The deal that you worked on with Jared and Jason Greenblatt, the deal that y'all worked on so closely would have lifted them up.
Yeah.
But every single time they refused to come to the negotiating table.
My direct message to the Palestinian people is that despite what those who have let you down in the past tell you, President Trump and America have not given up on you.
It's not that they were ignored. A peace offer was put on the table for them. They had a door to go through to get their legitimate aspirations, but you were not going to allow them to have veto power over the decisions of the Arab states.
What will the Arab governments do, like Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, Jordan? If they like the Trump peace plan, then there'll be pressure on the Palestinians to actually think about it.
The administration had yet further to go. In Bahrain, we had unveiled our economic plan. On the cusp of an unforeseen and historic pandemic, and with political turmoil in Israel, we still had to show the world our political plan.
We were planning to put out the vision for peace, as you know very well, already in end of 2018. And then Israel went for elections. And you have a decision to make. Do you want this plan to be seen as a substantive, serious plan that can stand the test of time, or perhaps be caught up in an election?
Or more than one election.
Or more than one election.
Yes.
Here we are, we work and put this plan together, and it's very detailed, very constructive, and yet we're just sitting on it. We again and again and again found is that Israeli elections are not exactly the same as the elections in the United States. You definitely vote for a party. Whichever gets the largest representation is given a mandate to try to build a coalition. And if they're capable of piecing together a coalition, they form a government. But if they can't, they go to another election. This is not something Americans traditionally appreciate. And so we traveled to Israel, and Jared has a meeting with the Prime Minister. We were all there.
It's been dubbed the deal of the century. So far, Israel's Prime Minister giving his stamp of approval.
And all through this time, I mean, the Prime Minister is with us.
It's great that he's with you until he's no longer there to be with you,
Right.
potentially. The night before, one of the members of the party says, no, I will not join with Prime Minister Netanyahu. The coalition breaks apart, and they're going to head to another election. And so we're waiting, and we're waiting. Who knows if they're ever going to form a government? And that sort of sinks into us. It's time to bring this to the president, and
Yeah.
it's time to decide,
Yeah.
is this plan going to see the light of day? Because there was a possibility, and it's a real one, a real possibility that the plan, because of the political considerations in Israel, other complications that were going around the world, would never have been put forward. And then ultimately the decision is made by the president, and we put out the plan.
Kushner kept putting it off with Israeli elections this past April and in September. They kept putting it off, but now President Trump has decided, I guess, the time is right.
On January 28, 2020, President Trump announced his plan for peace alongside Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, a month before the COVID pandemic would emerge.
My vision presents a win-win opportunity for both sides.
You have been the greatest friend that Israel has ever had in the White House. And because I believe your peace plan strikes the right balance where other plans have failed, I've agreed to negotiate peace with the Palestinians on the basis of your peace plan.
The Palestinians come out and say, we will not negotiate on this basis, and actually said no to the plan prior to it even being put forth. President Abbas designates a trip to the United Nations to come.
President Abbas to address the Council as part of a diplomatic offensive. The aim is to defeat the Trump plan.
And so then begins, honestly, like, working through country by country ways to stop a resolution condemning our plan. Working through the Security Council, because there's 15 members, 5 permanent, 10 that are rotational, and any member of the 5 who are the permanent members can veto a resolution in front of the Security Council. Major diplomatic effort led by Jared in New York to build a consensus, and then you have a little bit of a block.
If it's voted on, the US is bound as a permanent member to use its veto. However, the Palestinians are hoping they'll be isolated, with all the other members of the Security Council either supporting them or abstaining.
That would trigger a vote in the General Assembly. Over 100 countries come to the support of condemning this plan, and the plan could be dead before it's ever been actually read by anyone. And Jared puts out a slide basically showing how the Palestinian leadership, by extending this conflict, has actually been able to raise significant sums. If we just put forward new UN resolutions, we may never actually see a resolution to this conflict. We're able, through strategy and negotiations, to pull away enough countries that the vote doesn't even happen. When we put forward the vision for peace, what you found was that all of these countries in the region, they actually looked at it. Instead of the Palestinians being willing to come to the table and negotiate, what we actually found was other countries sent their ambassadors.
With the ambassadors of the United Arab Emirates, Bahrain, and Oman, what a pleasure to see you here, and what a sign it portends. I was going to say of the future, what a sign it portends of the present.
Next time on the Abraham Accords.
The feeling within the people in the White House was one of, where was the next punch coming from?
We may well fail, but we know that path. We know how that path ends.
Before the UAE deal was announced, were you ever confident this was going to get done?
No.
We're here this afternoon to change the course of history. After decades of division and conflict, we mark the dawn of a new Middle East. Exactly 70 years ago, the United States, under President Harry Truman, became the first nation to recognize the State of Israel. Today, we follow through on this recognition and open our embassy in the historic and sacred land of Jerusalem. Our greatest hope is for peace. The United States remains fully committed to facilitating a lasting peace agreement, and we extend a hand in friendship to Israel, the Palestinians, and to all of their neighbors. May there be peace. May God bless this embassy. May God bless all who serve there. And may God bless the United States of America.